Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlon Bowling with you. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. Appreciate that a lot. In fact, go ahead and like this video and make sure that you click on that little bell icon down below so you can subscribe. That means we can let you know when we have a new episode posted. And be sure and share this video as well with others to help spread the information out. I want to welcome aboard Ken Legé today, and he is an extension cotton specialist with Texas A&M University's AgriLife Extension Service. He is actually located in Lubbock, Texas. And Ken, I'm very interested to hear what you have to say because all eyes this year seem to be on what's going to go on with the cotton crop. A lot of folks are very wary of those numbers that came out from USDA on planting intentions this year. And I guess for good reason. It sounds like you still have quite a few variables out there to consider yet.
Well, absolutely. Appreciate the opportunity to be on your show this morning. And yes, cotton acres are always volatile here in the high plains. USDA and others come out with acreage estimates, and we know that the standard deviation of those estimates are just huge, because in West Texas, everything's about water and everything interacts with water and its availability. And acreage estimates are not resistant to that. So it comes down to, there's about 60% of the cotton acres are within 100 miles of Lubbock. The majority of those are dry land acres, which is challenging in a semi-arid environment like Lubbock, Texas. And it all comes down to, if we have a properly timed planting rain, the growers around here tend to plant cotton on those dry land acres. So it will all come down to when the timing of that rain is, and how late it becomes, if it's past the insurance dates for those particular geographies. But these guys tend to want to plant cotton because, one, they're invested in it with their own equipment, but many of these growers are also member owners or some association with some ginning infrastructure. And of course, we've had 2 really tough years as far as production goes. So the gins are wanting volume to go through those plants.
That's interesting. So what is the subsoil makeup like this year as we come out of the winter and get into the spring? Have you done any recharge yet?
We have in some areas. If you go north of Lubbock, it tends to be clay loams and loams. If you go south and west of Lubbock, it's more of sandy loams and fine sandy loams and even some sands. In that southwest portion, where unfortunately we don't have the highest soil moisture holding capacity, we haven't got the rainfall that the north and east portions of the Lubbock southern high plains cotton region has. In some areas this past week, upwards of 2.5, more than 3 inches in some areas. So in those areas, and those are the clay loam type areas, we're actually sitting pretty good. And of course, if you look at the U.S. drought monitor that came out this past Thursday, much of the region is out of drought status, and the western and southwestern areas, there's some areas that are abnormally dry, and there's a few little areas that show D1 drought, but by and large, most areas are out of drought status going into the season. So that's a good sign, and it's certainly raised the optimism and improved the moods of cotton farmers, cotton researchers, and extension folks alike.
I know in the last 10 or 15 years, cotton production seems to have moved northward up into Kansas. Has it pretty much found its boundary now, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you asked, because I continually get calls from those upper north regions asking, how can we do it? And growers in those northern, the Arctic Circle of cotton, if you will, continue to push those limits. And with earlier maturing varieties and strong seedling vigor of some varieties that you can really push the envelope, some growers are getting away with that. Now, I always say about 2 years out of 10, they're going to get caught and not have a crop, because either on the front side or back side going to have a cool spell that just brings the brick wall down. But those growers are producing high yields. They have pretty good water in those northern areas compared to what, especially with what they're spending on corn. So a lot of them are going a half circle of corn, half circle of cotton, the timing of their peak demand really works out well. And of course, cotton's a much more tolerant, drought tolerant crop, so that it's not using as much water as their corn crop is. So that crop rotation is actually working real well, and they're making some really good yields. They do fight low micronair, the maturity and coarseness, fineness of that fiber suffers. When they have some cool temperatures in the late fall, they can get some discounts due to low micronair. But this past year, they actually hit a nice home run on the acres they did have because micronair was quite high for that region. So they are growing successfully north of Lubbock. Martin, it wasn't that long ago that everybody thought that the northern edge of the cotton belt in this high plains region was Plainview, Texas, which is about an hour north of Lubbock. Now it's about 5 hours north of Lubbock into southwest Kansas.
Now, if you go northward from the Gulf states, you don't see much encroachment to the north from the cotton growing down there. Is that more just because of economics? Is it more due to humidity? What do you think?
I think most of it, and of course, if you look at the Mississippi River Valley, for example, the northern edge of cotton is the Boot Hill, Missouri, and that northwest Tennessee area, and it has been for years. So it really hadn't changed over the years. And I don't know the real answer. I suspect it has a lot to do with infrastructure. And of course, those areas that receive that higher rainfall, even in eastern Oklahoma and into Arkansas, they have a lot more crop options. So they can grow soybeans, they can grow corn, sorghum, the world's opened up to them. Whereas if you go in the semi-arid areas where I live and northward, your crop choices are quite limited.
Okay, let's talk about the economics of growing cotton this year. We've had quite a rally over the past couple of years. Things have eased back here lately a little bit. Big spread between the nearby contracts and the new crop December cotton prices that's been going on for at least half a year now. Um, in your in your mind, what is the break even on cotton this year? Some have been telling me around 85 cents. Does that sound right?
That's probably the ballpark. And here it greatly depends on a grower's irrigation capacity. So dryland cotton, the price would be a little bit lower, maybe in that 78 cent range. Uh, AgriLife does have some crop budgets that can aid growers in dialing in where their particular break even is. But for really good water, which for us is 4 to 5 gallons per minute per acre, which is really rare here. You go north of Amarillo, you'll find a few more fields that have that type of capacity. Their break even is a little bit lower than others because they can really push that yield. But here in the Lubbock area, where good water here is 2 to 3 gallons per minute per acre, so you're looking at top yield capacity potential being in that 1.5 2 bale range is kind of a dependable yield with that kind of water year in and year out. Yeah, that pushes your break even yield a little bit higher because you simply don't have the yield potential that other fields have. So yeah, it greatly depends on what that grower's irrigation capacity is and how many acres he's growing, because that always figures into the efficiency of all the planting, harvesting, other operations in his particular operation.
Well, some folks in the heartland of the country might be thinking, wow, cotton had some really high prices last year. That actually looks pretty attractive. However, cotton is a crop that you don't just jump into overnight, is it? There's just a little bit of investment involved there. You might explain that.
Well, certainly, planting equipment is very similar. So, cotton uses some of the same planters that corn, soybeans, milo uses. It's really from there. So it's intensively managed during the season. There are, herbicide options are more scarce for cotton than it is for other crops, particularly beans and corn that have many more options of over-the-top herbicides. So that's one big change there. So lots of intensive labor during the season. We typically have to use plant growth regulators to control both the maturity and the height of that canopy. And then, of course, the big ticket item comes with the harvest equipment because you can't run a combine through cotton, so it takes a unique stripper or picker depending on what geography you're sitting in. And those particular machines are not cheap, and they do one thing: they harvest cotton. Then after harvest, grain farmers are pretty much done after harvest. They market the crop, everything, all their part of the operation is done. With cotton, there's lots of post-harvest processing and classing that goes into the valuation of that crop. So it has to be ginned to separate the fiber from the seed, and then that fiber is classed by USDA facilities, and that puts a value on that particular bale. The good thing about cotton, it's been for a couple of decades now, totally trackable. So people around the world, when they buy a bale of cotton in a textile mill for use, they know exactly not only what region of the country that bale came from, but they can track it down to the very farm. And if they get enough detail, they can get what field and what part of the field that bale came from. So we're miles ahead on the trackability, but it does involve a lot of post-harvest processing and classing.
Well, and you brought up another good point. You have to transport it to the nearest gin. You get up north, and that's probably not something that's like right in your backyard, right?
Yes, and some gins, ginning has become a very competitive business. 10, 20 years ago, people ginned at their local gin, and there was no question about where that seed cotton was going. Now, gins have become very competitive. There are some really big plants, not only here around Lubbock, but especially up north. Those plants, some of those plants are really, really big. One of the biggest gins in the world is at Spearman, Texas. In fact, Spearman has two of the largest ginning operations in the world. So there's lots of pressure to put cotton through that plant to make it profitable. So those gins are being aggressive with marketing. And in some cases, you hear of some cotton being hauled. And of course, seed cotton is a very bulky material. You can't put that much on a truck because of the bulkiness of it. But some of those gins are transporting that seed cotton sometimes you hear 300 miles to feed those big plants. So some of those growers in those regions are getting pretty good deals on those ginning costs. So it's all of a sudden it's made gins compete with one another for that grower's business, which is different than it has been the last couple of decades for sure.
Can you give us an idea on the different planting zones date-wise, as far as how the cotton planting will progress? You always start way in the south, right?
Yeah, so South Texas usually begins in February. Of course, that's a long ways away from where I'm sitting in Lubbock, but so they'll begin in February. The Central Texas area generally has last 2 weeks of April or so, and then as you move northward, that date generally gets later. Here in Lubbock, where much of the acreage is, we'll plant usually the second through fourth week of May, maybe into June. South of Lubbock can plant into early June. In fact, dry land, the insurance dates are usually June 20. Oddly enough, in this region, the earliest planted crop is north of Amarillo. So that southwest Kansas and Texas Panhandle, Texas Oklahoma area. Every once in a while, you'll hear somebody planting in late April. And looking at the forecast, Martin, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some cotton planting north of Amarillo in the last few days of April because the forecast is actually looking fairly good. Now, to defend those guys, as one grower told me one time when we were planting a variety trial, I had my coat on, and I'm thinking this is not a good idea if I'm wearing a coat while we planting cotton. He says around here, if you're not wearing a jacket whenever you plant cotton, you're late. And of course, what his point was, you have to cheat the textbook a little bit to grow cotton in those regions. So they're typically planting when it's suboptimal conditions with regard to temperatures, and because they have to mature that crop early enough before the first freeze or first real cold front that comes out in the fall. So they're really having to push the envelope to get that crop in, and they have been very successful at doing that, as their production numbers the last few years have shown.
Wow. That's very interesting. I suppose they're wearing a cotton coat, right?
I hope so.
Well, I wondered if that had to do with more the availability of irrigation up that direction.
Absolutely. That's really what has pushed cotton northward is as the Ogallala aquifer levels have decreased. Of course, that's been a big corn area over those years, and of course, corn is a very good crop, but it does consume a lot of water compared to cotton. So as those wells north of Amarillo into the southwest Kansas area have decreased in capacity, they've seen that growing cotton in concert with corn is a good system not only time-wise, but they're saving water because that cotton crop's not using quite as much water as that corn was. So I think it's been a really good strategy for those guys in that northern region to diversify their crops. And it makes cotton growing a little bit easier because, like with anything, rotation is a very good thing. So as long as they can rotate some grass crops with some broadleaf crops, I think their herbicide, their disease, nematode situations have all improved because of that rotation.
Give us an idea, if you can, of a comparison of fertilizer costs of corn versus cotton out there.
Well, certainly, I think everybody's aware that with corn, a high consumer of nitrogen that responds very well to high levels of nitrogen, as well as P and K. Uh, some recent work by Dr. Katie Lewis and Joseph Burke here at AgriLife have shown that the old rule with cotton was apply 50 pounds of nitrogen for every bale of yield potential. So if you had a 2 bale crop, typically you'd shoot for 100 pounds of nitrogen, usually split over a couple times over the season. Now they've reduced that, and I think this is probably due to genetics. I think some of the newer genetics are more nutrient efficient. So their newer recommendation that's coming out is for 40 pounds of nitrogen for the first bale of yield potential, and then 35 to 40 pounds of nitrogen for every subsequent bale. So instead of needing 100 pounds of nitrogen for a 2 bale crop, now that grower can plan on either 75 or 80 pounds of nitrogen for that same 2 bale crop. So all of a sudden, that's real savings with the cost of fertilizer in recent years. So, and I do think that that's primarily due to genetics. The breeding industry has really stepped up and made the cotton plants not only more water use efficient, but certainly nitrogen, specifically nitrogen use efficient as well.
Can you foliar apply nitrogen on cotton like you can on corn or not?
Yes, it doesn't respond as efficiently as it does with corn, mainly because cotton is an indeterminate perennial crop. So you really have to be careful with foliar applications of things like nitrogen or even potassium because you could encourage vegetative growth over reproductive growth. So timing is important, and of course, just like most crops, the best place to put nutrients is the soil. Sometimes you can't get to that, or certain circumstances occur where you do need to supplement it with that foliar fertility. But certainly, up to peak bloom, which is usually 2 to 3 weeks after our first bloom appears in that crop, that's typically when you want to have all the fertility down, and then you just refine it and repair any deficiency symptoms you may be seeing in that crop after that point. That's usually when you're seeing the foliar fertilizers go out. And there are growers who regularly use it and see a return on investment. But it is something that you really need to have a crop consultant or extension involved to make sure that you're not going down the wrong road with applying too much foliar in too late and ending up with a lot of green leaves that you'll just have to knock off and really sacrificing yield as a result.
One thing I learned over the years when I was trying to get my feet wet and learning about cotton was I was surprised to learn that one of the key things to be worried about when the cotton is very young is electrostatic death. That blew my mind when I learned about that. You guys have so much wind in that part of the country there. And it can actually just fry the young plants, can it?
Absolutely, yeah. That becomes a problem in these windier seasons. And today, in fact, we're going to have quite a good wind. We're going to have dust in the air, so that dust moving across that surface of leaves and soil creates static electricity buildup, and that can cause some sometimes hard to diagnose symptomology on cotton. But yeah, under extreme conditions, it can kill that cotton crop, and if not kill it, certainly set it back to where it's seriously damaged and delayed. But where growers can, they do put cover crops. Now, cover crops are a great idea because it protects it from windblown damage, certainly protects it from static damage like that. But they also use water, so it's always the balance of, did the rainfall come at the right time? Do I have irrigation capacity sufficient to where I can grow a cover crop and a cotton crop? Because typically, if you don't have a cover crop and you're conventionally tilled, there are things called sand fighters that if folks are not familiar with what a sand fighter is, if you're not in the Boot Hill, Missouri, or here in West Texas, if you want to have a lot of fun, just come and drive a sand fighter around and rough up that soil to keep dust from blowing. So yeah, growers around here really don't enjoy. If you want to really get somebody in a bad mood, say go hook up to the sand fighter. Nobody likes to drive a sand fighter,
Yeah.
but it is important when the time comes.
Oh man. Well, thanks for spelling everything out, Ken. Learned a lot, and I think it sounds like you're probably at least a month and a half away from planting where you are there. Is that right then?
Yeah, of course, it all depends on temperature, but we have seen some planting start in the Lubbock area as early as 10th or 12th of May. Most of it becomes that third or fourth week of May is kind of the peak time. So yeah, we're getting close. We're getting awful close.
Well, thanks again for the time, and hopefully we can catch up with you a little later on in the growing
You
season
bet. Enjoyed
and
it.
see how things are going by then. So I appreciate the help.
You bet.
Thank you, Ken. Ken Legé. He is with Texas A&M University AgriLife Extension. He's in Lubbock, Texas. And that will do it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. I learned a lot. Hope you did too. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlon Bowling. We'll catch you next time on the Comstock Channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.